I woke up to the smell of salt air drifting through a window I couldn't see. My arms wouldn't move. My lips wouldn't part. But my ears were wide open, and the first thing they caught was my daughter's voice, steady and cold, telling her husband exactly how much the boatyard was worth. Then the nurse leaned close to my bed and said 3 words that turned my coffin back into a fighting ring. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The last thing I remember before the darkness was standing at the end of T-Wharf with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand. October morning, the kind where the fog sits so low on Rockport Harbor that the lobster boats look like ghosts sliding across glass. I was watching the sun try to break through, thinking about Helen, thinking about how she used to say, the fog was just the ocean holding its breath. Then something snapped behind my eyes, a white flash, hot and quick, like a camera bulb going off inside my skull, and the wharf tilted sideways, and the coffee mug hit the planks, and I went down after it. They told me later it was a transient ischemic attack. A mini-stroke, the doctors called it. Like adding the word mini made it sound like something you could walk off, but whatever it was, it didn't stay mini for long. Something went wrong during the first 48 hours. Swelling, pressure, a cascade of failures in the parts of my brain that connect intention to action. By the time the swelling subsided, the damage had already set in. Locked-in syndrome. That's what Dr. Solis wrote on my chart. I know, because Lorraine, the nurse, the one who changed everything, read it to me weeks later. Her voice careful and steady, like she was diffusing a bomb. Your mind is fully intact, Mr. Brynn. Your body just isn't listening right now. She had a gift for understatement. I could blink. That was it. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. My entire vocabulary reduced to the movement of my eyelids. 74 years of living of hauling timber and bending oak ribs and shouting orders across the yard while the wind tried to steal every word, and now I communicated like a lighthouse. On, off, on, off. The hospital room at Addison Gilbert smelled like antiseptic and old linoleum. But if I concentrated, if I pulled my attention away from the hum of the monitors and the plastic tubing taped to my wrist, I could still catch it, the salt. Rockport salt. It crept in through the edges of the window sill, faint but stubborn. The way everything in that town is stubborn. The way I used to be. For the first few days, I drifted. Time didn't move in hours anymore. It moved in sounds. The squeak of rubber soles on tile, the click of the IV pump cycling through, the muffled conversations in the hallway that blurred together like waves against the breakwater. I couldn't tell Tuesday from Saturday. I couldn't tell morning from night, unless someone opened the blinds. And then Vivian came, my daughter, my only child. The girl who used to sit on the workbench at the boatyard with her legs swinging, eating peanut butter crackers and asking me why boats float. The girl Helen and I raised in the Cape Cod house on Norwood Road, with the blue shutters and the garden that never grew right because the soil was too sandy. She was 51 now. And the girl who asked about boats was long gone. She came on what I think was the 4th day. I heard her heels first sharp, deliberate. The sound of someone who had somewhere more important to be. Then, Marcus, her husband. His footsteps were softer, almost apologetic. The way a man walks when he's learned it's easier to follow than to lead. They didn't say hello to me. They didn't touch my hand or lean down to tell me they loved me. They pulled 2 chairs to the far side of the room, not beside my bed, but near the window. As if I were furniture they had to talk around, and they started speaking in low voices. But here's the thing about a quiet room with tile floors and no carpet. Sound carries. Every word bounced off those walls and landed right in my useless ears like stones dropped into still water. The boatyard alone is worth $320, maybe $350 if we get the right buyer, Marcus said. I heard the rustle of paper, a folder opening. I've already talked to Crestline Development. They're interested. They want to tear down the old buildings and put in a marina with slips for luxury yachts. $350. He was talking about my boatyard. The one my father built in 1952. With lumber he hauled himself from a mill in Ipswich. The one I'd spent 40 years keeping alive, replacing every rotted beam, every cracked rib, every rusted fitting, while the rest of Rockport's working waterfront disappeared under boutique hotels and art galleries. "What about the house?" Vivian asked. "Norwood Road?" "We list it as is. Market strong for coastal properties. Could get 420. Maybe 450 with the lot size." I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and tell them to get out, to take their folders and their numbers and their clinical bloodless inventory of my life and leave. But my body was a locked door, and I was on the wrong side of it. "We need to move on the power of attorney," Vivian continued. Her voice was flat, practiced. "Before anyone starts asking questions," Dr. Solis said, "there's no realistic chance of significant recovery. We need to be positioned as decision-makers before some social worker gets involved." My daughter. Talking about positioning, about moving quickly, about making sure no one asked questions. I blinked. Nobody was watching. Then the door opened. Soft-soled shoes. The scent of cocoa butter lotion and something faintly herbal peppermint, maybe. A presence that moved to my bedside with a kind of deliberate calm. The way someone approaches a wounded animal. Lorraine Mosley. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know that she had been a nurse for 23 years, or that she had transferred to Addison Gilbert from a burn unit in Boston because she couldn't watch one more child scream. I didn't know that she had a way of reading people's silences the way most people read faces. All I knew was that she was standing next to me, and that she placed 2 fingers against my wrist, not on the monitor side, but on the other wrist, the one with nothing attached to it, and held them there. As if she were listening to me through my pulse. Vivian stopped talking. The room went quiet. Lorraine didn't look at my daughter. She looked at me, right into my open, frozen eyes. And I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen from anyone since I woke up in this bed. Recognition. She leaned down, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my ear. And she said 3 words. "Not to me. To them. He hears you." The silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. Vivian's chair scraped backward. Marcus cleared his throat. And somewhere beneath the monitors and the tubes and the weight of my own useless body, something stirred. Something old and stubborn and salted by 74 years of Rockport wind. I blinked once. Yes. I hear everything. I used to walk the docks every morning before the sun came up. Not because I had to. Because Helen told me to. "A man who builds boats should know what the water looks like before anyone else is watching," she said once, standing in the kitchen doorway with flour on her wrist and sourdough rising behind her on the counter. "Go walk. Talk to the harbor. Come back when you've got something to tell me." So I walked. Every morning for 41 years. Down the gravel path behind the house on Norwood Road. Past the old Congregational Cemetery, where the headstones lean like tired men. Across the footbridge at the end of King Street, and out along T Wharf, where the gulls fought over bait scraps and the lobster traps were stacked in walls of wire and rope. I'd stand at the end of the pier and watch the harbor breathe. The slow rise and fall of the tide against the granite pilings, the mooring lines creaking like old knuckles, and I'd think about whatever needed thinking about. Most mornings, that meant the boatyard. My father, Arthur Brynn, started Brynn Boatworks in 1952 with a handshake loan from a fish dealer named Sal Giacomo and a pile of white oak hauled from a mill in Ipswich. The yard sat at the base of T Wharf, a long tin-roofed shed with a marine railway that groaned every time you pulled a boat from the water. It wasn't much to look at, but it was honest work. And in Rockport in those days, honest work was the only currency that mattered. I started sweeping the shop floor when I was 11. By 14, I could steam bend an oak rib without cracking it. By 18, I could lay a plank line that followed the curve of a hull like water follows gravity. Smooth, inevitable, right. My father never said he was proud. That wasn't his way. but I'd catch him standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching me work, and the corner of his mouth would lift just enough to let me know. He died in 1978. Heart attack. Right there in the shop, between the bandsaw and the workbench, with sawdust in his hair. I found him that morning, still holding a pencil. I sat on the floor next to him for a long time before I called anyone. I didn't cry. Brynn men didn't cry. We just got quieter. I took over the yard the next day. I was 36. Helen and I had been married 12 years by then. We'd met at a church picnic in Gloucester. She was pouring lemonade, and I was standing in line, pretending I was thirsty, when really I was trying to figure out how to talk to the woman with the dark hair and the laugh that sounded like wind chimes made of something stronger than glass. It took me 3 cups of lemonade and 2 slices of pie before I managed more than thank you. She told me later she'd noticed me on the first cup and was just waiting to see how much pie I could eat before I found my nerve. She was a teacher. 4th grade at Rockport Elementary. She had a way of looking at a struggling child not with pity, not with impatience, but with this steady, patient certainty that they would figure it out. And they always did. Because when Helen Brynn believed in you, you started believing in yourself. That was her gift. It wasn't loud. It just was. The way the tide just is constant, dependable, and strong enough to move everything it touches. We had Vivian in 1975. Born during a nor'easter that knocked the power out for 3 days. Helen delivered by candlelight with a midwife named Doris, who drove through the storm in a station wagon with bald tires. When I finally held my daughter, this tiny, red-faced, furious thing wrapped in a yellow blanket, I made her a promise. I will never let anything hurt you. I meant it with every plank and rib and keel I'd ever laid. And for a long time, I kept that promise. Through the ear infections and the nightmares. Through the teenage years when she slammed doors and said things that left marks deeper than storm damage on a hull. Through the quiet years after she moved to Boston, when the phone calls got shorter and the house on Norwood Road felt bigger every winter. But somewhere, and I still can't tell you when keeping the promise stopped being enough. The thing that would hurt my daughter wasn't something I could step in front of. It wasn't a storm or a bully. It was something inside her, a hunger I didn't understand. A coldness that crept in so slowly I mistook it for independence. Helen saw it first. She always did. Walter, she said one evening in 2017, sitting at the kitchen table with bank statements fanned out before her. There's $3,000 missing from savings, transferred to an account I don't recognize. She took off her glasses. I think it's Vivian's. I told her it was a mistake. A glitch. I told her our daughter was many things. Stubborn, sharp-tongued, distant, but not a thief. Helen looked at me the way she looked at a 4th grader who had the answer right in front of him but refused to read it. I opened a separate account today, she said quietly. $8,000. My name only. I'm calling it the safety fund. She folded the statements and tucked them inside her old leather lesson planner. When the storm comes, Walter, we'll need it. And the storm is coming. I should have listened. I should have called Vivian, demanded answers. But I was a man who built boats, not a man who navigated the currents between a mother and a daughter. So I went back to my newspaper and pretended the water wasn't rising. Helen died 14 months later. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosis to gone in 11 weeks. I held her hand in the hospice room and watched the tide go out for the last time. And when it was over, I walked to T-Wharf in the dark and stood at the end of the pier and said nothing, because for the first time in 41 years, I had nothing left to tell the harbor. The morning walks continued. But they were quieter. And the coffee went cold. Faster. And somewhere in the silence, the storm Helen warned me about gathered its strength. Lorraine Mosley had a rule she never broke. Read the chart before you read the patient. She'd learned that her first year out of nursing school, working the burn unit at Massachusetts General, where the screaming was so constant it became a kind of weather, something you moved through, something you carried home in your clothes. A veteran nurse named Pauline had pulled her aside after a particularly bad shift and said, "The chart tells you what happened. The patient tells you what's still happening. You need both. And you need them in that order." So when Lorraine transferred to Addison Gilbert Hospital in Gloucester, quieter, slower, a place where the emergencies came wrapped in the ordinary rhythms of a coastal town, she kept the rule. Every patient, every shift. Chart first, then eyes, then hands. My chart, she told me later, didn't make sense. The basics were straightforward enough. Walter Brynn, 74, transient ischemic attack on October 14th, followed by complications leading to locked-in syndrome. Stable vitals, feeding tube, catheter. Cognitive function presumed intact based on initial EEG readings. All of that tracked. But it was the medication log that made Lorraine stop and read it twice. Dr. Solis had prescribed a standard post-stroke protocol: blood thinners, anti-seizure medication, a mild sedative for sleep. Reasonable. Conservative. Exactly what you'd expect. But layered on top of that, added 3 days after admission, was a secondary order. Increased sedation during daytime hours. Reduced physical therapy frequency from daily to twice weekly, and a note handwritten, not typed into the system, that read, "Per family request, limit patient stimulation to essential care only." Family request. Meaning Vivian. Lorraine stood at the nurse's station under the fluorescent lights, with my chart open in her hands, and did something most people in her position wouldn't do. She didn't shrug. She didn't assume the doctor knew best. She asked a question. Why would the family want less stimulation for a locked-in patient? The other nurse on duty, a younger woman named Tanya, glanced up from her computer. Daughter said he gets agitated. Eyes moving too much. She thinks it stresses him out. His eyes moving is the only thing he can do, Lorraine said. Tanya shrugged. Family's family. But Lorraine had spent 23 years watching families. She'd watched parents hold dying children with a grace that made God seem close. She'd watched husbands scream at doctors because screaming was the only language their grief spoke. She'd watched daughters sit for weeks beside beds, reading aloud, brushing hair, adjusting pillows, doing the small, useless, sacred things people do when they can't do the one thing that matters. And she'd watched the other kind too. The ones who stood at the foot of the bed with their arms crossed, calculating. The ones who asked about prognosis before they asked about pain. The ones whose visits were short, purposeful, and always ended with a conversation in the hallway that had nothing to do with healing. Vivian was the other kind. Lorraine knew it the moment she saw her in my room that first day, sitting by the window with Marcus, talking about the boatyard in the same tone you'd use to discuss a stock portfolio. And the 3 words Lorraine had spoken, "He hears you," weren't just a medical observation. They were a warning shot. A flare fired across the bow, but a flare only works if someone sees it. Over the next several days, Lorraine began watching more carefully. She noted the times Vivian visited, always midday, always when Dr. Solis was in clinic and the floor was at minimum staffing. She noted that Marcus came separately twice, both times carrying folders, both times stepping out to make phone calls in the stairwell where the reception was bad, but the privacy was good. She noted that Vivian never spoke to me directly. Not once. She spoke about me, around me, over me, but never to me. And she noted something else. Something that made the hairs on her forearms stand up. On Tuesday, 6 days after my admission, Lorraine came on shift and found that my bed had been moved. Not to a different room, just repositioned. Turned so that I faced the wall instead of the door. A small change, the kind of thing that could be explained away as housekeeping, as maintenance, as someone bumping the bed while mopping. But Lorraine understood what it meant. It meant that whoever came into my room next could stand behind me and speak without my eyes tracking them. It meant I'd been repositioned not for my comfort, but for someone else's privacy. She moved me back. She adjusted the bed so I could see the door, the window, and anyone who entered. and she taped a small handwritten note to the inside of my chart. Patient bed position per nursing care plan. Do not adjust without RN approval. That night, after her shift, Lorraine sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for a long time. The harbor was invisible in the dark, but she could hear it, the slap of water against the seawall, the distant clang of a buoy, the wind pushing through the rigging of the sailboats moored at the town dock. She thought about my chart. She thought about the sedation order. She thought about the bed, turned to face the wall like a punishment. And she thought about something Pauline had told her years ago in the burn unit, during a shift so bad that Lorraine had gone to the break room and put her head against the wall and cried. "You're not here to save everyone," Pauline had said. "You're here to make sure nobody disappears quietly." Lorraine pulled out her phone. She opened the browser and typed, "Signs of elder abuse in hospitalized patients." She read for an hour. Then she typed a second search. Legal obligations of nurses reporting suspected elder abuse, Massachusetts. The screen glowed blue against her face in the dark car. The harbor breathed outside. And somewhere on the third floor of Addison Gilbert, I lay in my bed, facing the door because a woman I barely knew had decided I was worth watching over. She didn't know about Helen's warning. She didn't know about the $3,000 or the safety fund or the storm that had been building for years. She didn't know any of it yet, but she knew the chart was wrong. And for Lorraine Mosley, that was enough. Marcus came alone on a Thursday. I knew it was Thursday because Lorraine had started telling me the day and time at the beginning of every shift. She'd lean down while adjusting my IV line and say it quietly, like a secret only the two of us shared. Thursday. Mr. Brynn, October 22nd, 7:14 a.m. Temperatures dropping outside. Harbor looks like pewter this morning. She gave me the world in small pieces because she understood that when you can't move, time becomes the first thing you lose. So it was Thursday, and Marcus walked in at 11:45. I could see the clock on the wall above the door. The one luxury my repositioned bed afforded me, carrying a leather briefcase I'd never seen before. He was wearing a navy sport coat, the kind a man wears when he wants to look official but doesn't own a suit. His shoes were polished. His hair was combed. He looked like a man going to a closing. He was. "Hey, Walt." He pulled a chair to my bedside, not to the window this time, but close, angled so he could see the door. His voice had that careful warmth people use on dogs and dementia patients. "How you doing today?" "Looking good. Color's better." I stared at the ceiling. My color was not better. My color was the gray-white of a man who hadn't seen sunlight in 9 days. Marcus set the briefcase on his lap and clicked it open. The sound was precise, metallic, final, like the latch on a trap. He pulled out a folder and laid it on the bed beside my right hand. Then he uncapped a pen, a heavy black pen, the kind that costs more than it should, and placed it between my fingers, which could not close. The pen rested there for a moment, balanced on the loose curl of my index finger, and then slid off and hit the floor with a small, sharp click. Marcus looked at it, looked at my hand, picked up the pen and tried again, this time pressing my fingers around it, squeezing them gently into position the way you'd shape a child's hand around a crayon. The pen fell again. "Okay," he said, exhaling through his nose. "That's fine. We'll work with what we've got." He opened the folder. I could see the top page from the angle of my bed, dense text, a notary seal at the bottom, and a yellow, sticky arrow pointing to a signature line. The words at the top were just close enough to read. "Durable power of attorney, financial and healthcare decisions." "Vivian and I have been talking to the hospital's legal department," Marcus said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, speaking slowly, as if I were a child or very far away. "Given your condition, we need to make sure someone can manage your affairs. Bills, the house, insurance, the boatyard, there's a lot to take care of, Walt, and you've got no one else. So Vivian's going to step in. This paperwork just makes it official. No one else." The words landed in my chest like a stone dropped into a well. No one else. As if Helen's entire life, her plans, her warnings, her careful preparations, had never existed. As if the safety fund and the bank statements and the look she gave me across the kitchen table meant nothing. As if the only people left in the world were the two who wanted to pick my bones clean. Marcus picked up the pen again. This time he didn't try to put it in my hand. He flipped to the last page of the document and held it up so I could see the signature line. I'm going to guide your hand, Walt. Just a mark. Doesn't have to be pretty. The notary will witness that you made your best effort given your condition. He reached for my hand, and the door opened. Lorraine came in carrying a blood pressure cuff and a look on her face that I would later learn to recognize as her war face, calm on the surface, absolutely immovable underneath. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She walked to the opposite side of the bed, positioned herself between Marcus and my right arm, and began wrapping the cuff around my bicep with the unhurried precision of a woman who had all the time in the world. "Good morning, Mr. Harlow," she said without looking at him. "I need to take Mr. Brynn's vitals. Standard protocol. Takes about 10 minutes. I was just 10 minutes. She inflated the cuff. The hiss of air filled the room like a slow exhalation. She watched the gauge, noted something on her clipboard, and then, still without looking at Marcus, she picked up the folder from my bed, closed it, and set it on the windowsill. "Out of reach. Hospital policy," she said. "No documents on the patient's bed during clinical procedures. Infection control. I'm fairly certain that was not a real policy. But she said it with the authority of a woman who had spent 2 decades in hospitals, and Marcus, who had spent 2 decades doing whatever the nearest authority told him, sat back in his chair and said nothing. Lorraine took her time. She checked my blood pressure twice. She checked my oxygen levels. She adjusted the IV drip rate by a fraction that may or may not have needed adjusting. She repositioned my pillow. She made notes. And the entire time she stood between Marcus and my right hand like a breakwater, standing between the open ocean and the harbor. When she finally finished, she turned to Marcus and smiled. It was a professional smile, the kind that covers steel. "Mr. Brynn needs rest now. Visiting hours for the afternoon start at 2. Marcus looked at the folder on the windowsill. He looked at Lorraine. He picked up his briefcase, left the pen on the floor where it had fallen the second time, and walked out without saying goodbye. The room was quiet. Just the monitors. Just the tide of my own breathing. Lorraine stood beside me, and I could feel her, watching my face, the way she always did, reading what my body couldn't say. I needed to tell her something. One word. The most important word I had left. I gathered everything, every scrap of electrical signal my damaged brain could push through the wreckage, and I sent it to my lips. It took everything I had. It came out broken. Barely a whisper. More breath than sound. Della. Lorraine leaned closer. "Say it again, Mr. Brynn. Della." A little stronger this time. A name I hadn't spoken in years. A woman Helen had trusted. A woman who knew the law the way I knew would. By feel. By instinct. By the grain of it. Lorraine wrote it down on the back of her clipboard. She didn't ask who Della was. She didn't ask why. She just wrote the name and underlined it twice. "I'll find her," she said, and the pen stayed on the floor. Della Okafor arrived on a Saturday morning carrying a canvas tote bag, a thermos of black coffee, and the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need a raised voice to fill a room. I didn't see her come in. I heard her. Flat shoes on linoleum, not heels like Vivian's, not the apologetic shuffle of Marcus, but steady, deliberate steps that said, "I'm here now, and I know exactly why." Then a voice, warm and low, directed at Lorraine near the door. "I'm Della Okafor. You called me about Walter Brynn." "I did. Thank you for coming. You said he asked for me by name." "He did. First word he's spoken since admission." She stepped into my line of sight. 61 now, hair cropped short and silver at the temples, Face thinner than I remembered, but her eyes exactly the same. Dark brown, steady, the kind that made witnesses tell the truth not because they were afraid, but because lying to those eyes felt like a waste of everyone's time. Helen had found Della 20 years ago. Back when Della was fresh out of Suffolk law, working legal aid in Gloucester, for families who couldn't afford a parking ticket attorney. One of Helen's tutoring students, a boy named Terrell, whose father faced eviction, needed help beyond multiplication tables. Helen called every lawyer in the phone book. Della was the only one who answered on a Saturday. She won the case, kept the family in their home, and became part of Helen's orbit, one of those people my wife collected over the years. Not like trophies, but like seeds she planted in other lives, trusting they'd grow when the time was right. The time was right. Della pulled a chair to my bedside and spoke to me the way she always had, directly. Precisely. The way she'd speak to any client. Walter, I'm going to assume you understand everything. Blink once for yes. I blinked. Good. Lorraine told me what she's observed: the power of attorney attempt, sedation changes, bed repositioning, visiting patterns. I've done preliminary research. She pulled a yellow legal pad from her tote bag, handwriting so small and neat it looked printed. Here's where we stand. She laid it out the way a surgeon lays out instruments. First, the power of attorney Marcus tried to get you to sign is invalid. You're locked in, not incapacitated. There's a legal distinction. Your cognitive function is intact. Any document signed with a family member physically manipulating your hand would be thrown out by any competent judge in Essex County. I blinked once. Second, Vivian has already begun moving money. I contacted your bank under preliminary inquiry. Helen's name still carries weight at Rockport Savings. 3. Transfers this past week, totaling $18,000. Moved from your joint checking to an account registered to Crestline Property Holdings. That's Marcus's company. $18,000. In 9 days. The room seemed to tilt, though nothing moved but the numbers in my head. Third, Massachusetts law requires that sedation changes or therapy reductions must be authorized by the attending physician with documented clinical justification. The note in your chart says, per family request. That's not clinical justification. That's a family member dictating care to keep a patient quiet. Something in her voice hardened, the way steel hardens in cold water. Lorraine has documented everything. From behind me, Lorraine's voice. I photographed the chart, every shift change. Della nodded. That brings me to the plan. She held up 4 fingers. Step 1. Emergency petition with Essex County Probate Court. For a temporary guardian ad litem, an independent party, to represent your interests. This prevents Vivian from making any decisions on your behalf until the court rules. 1 finger down. Step 2. Formal psychiatric capacity evaluation. A board-certified neuropsychiatrist assesses your cognitive function independently. When it confirms what we know, your mind is intact, we have legal foundation to proceed. 2 down. Step 3. Revocable living trust. Your assets, house, boatyard, accounts go into the trust. You name the beneficiary and trustee. Not Vivian. Not Marcus. 3 down. Step 4. Durable power of attorney, real this time, properly executed, naming someone you choose, plus an advance healthcare directive specifying who can and cannot make medical decisions. She lowered her last finger and looked at me. Walter, is there anyone in your family you trust? I thought about Vivian calculating the boatyard's value. I thought about Marcus and the pen on the floor, and then I thought about someone else. Someone I hadn't seen in almost a year, small and fierce and stubborn in a way that reminded me of Helen. I blinked once. Who? My lips barely parted. The air scraped through like sandpaper on raw wood. But it came. Bria. Lorraine stepped closer. Bria? Who's Bria? Della answered. She was already writing, pen moving fast, and something shifted in her expression, not a smile, but a softening. Jamie's daughter. Vivian's granddaughter. Through her son Jamie. 15 years old. She looked at me. Helen talked about her. Said Bria was the one who still had salt water in her veins. I blinked once. Hard. Della closed her legal pad and stood. The elevator chimed down the hallway. Visiting hours starting. Vivian always arrived at noon on Saturdays. Punctual as a bill collector. Lorraine. I'll need 15 minutes with Mr. Brynn's attending physician Monday. Can you arrange that? Already done. Della looked down at me. Helen sent me Walter. That's how I'm choosing to see it. And I don't intend to let her down. She picked up her thermos and walked out, flat shoes steady on the linoleum, and the room felt different, not warmer exactly, but sturdier. Like someone had checked the keel and found it sound. 3 minutes later, I heard Vivian's heels in the corridor. The war hadn't started yet, but the sides had been drawn. Helen tried to tell me 3 times. I ignored her twice and misunderstood the third. The first time was Thanksgiving. 2016. The whole family was at the house on Norwood Road. Vivian and Marcus, Jamie and his girlfriend at the time, a quiet girl from Marblehead whose name I can't remember now. Helen had spent 2 days cooking. Turkey, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce from scratch, sweet potatoes with the brown sugar crust that Jamie used to scrape off the casserole dish with his finger when he thought nobody was watching. The house smelled the way a house should smell, like effort, like tradition, like someone cared enough to stand in a kitchen for hours, making something that would be eaten in 20 minutes. After dinner, I was washing dishes. Helen came in and closed the kitchen door behind her, which she never did. The kitchen was the one room in our house that didn't have a door policy. It was always open. Always the center of everything. The place where conversations started and secrets ended. So when she closed that door, I turned off the faucet and looked at her. Vivian asked me for money, she said. I dried my hands on the towel. How much? 5,000. For what? Helen leaned against the counter. She was 63 then, and the cancer was still 3 years away from finding her. But something in her face that evening looked older than her body, tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. She said Marcus has a business opportunity. Some development company, Crestline I think she called it. They need capital for a deposit on a property in Newburyport. And you said? I said I'd talk to you. I should have heard what she wasn't saying. Helen Brynn didn't need my permission to make financial decisions. She managed the household accounts, the boatyard books, the tax filings. She'd been doing it since before Vivian was born because I was better with wood than numbers, and we both knew it. When she said, I'll talk to Walter, what she meant was, I need you to help me say no. But I didn't hear it. I heard my daughter needed help, and I heard a number that we could afford. And I said, if she needs it, give it to her. Helen looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, once, and opened the kitchen door, and the sound of the football game rushed back in, and the moment passed. She gave Vivian 3,000, not 5. I didn't learn that until later, until the bank statement conversation in 2017, until the safety fund. Helen had already started drawing her own lines, building her own walls, preparing for a storm she could see, and I refused to look at. The second time was the following spring, April 2017. Vivian and Marcus came for the weekend. One of those visits that felt more like an inspection than a homecoming. Marcus walked through the house making comments about the roof, the windows, the foundation. He knocked on walls like a man checking for hollowness. Vivian sat in the living room scrolling through her phone while Helen served coffee she hadn't asked for. On Saturday afternoon, I was in the boatyard with Hank Pressler, my foreman, my oldest friend, a man who'd worked beside me for 31 years and could read the weather in the grain of a plank. We were fitting a new garboard strake on a lobster boat when Helen appeared in the shop doorway. She was wearing her garden gloves, which meant she'd been outside. Which meant she'd been thinking, because Helen gardened the way I walked the docks, to sort through whatever was knotted up inside. I need to talk to you about the accounts, she said. Hank looked at me, looked at Helen. and suddenly discovered he needed a part from the storage shed. He disappeared with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd been married himself for 30 years and knew exactly what a wife standing in a doorway with garden gloves meant. $3,000 is missing from savings, Helen said. I didn't authorize it. You didn't authorize it. It was transferred electronically to an outside account. Maybe it's a bank error. It's not a bank error, Walter. You don't know that. I do know that. She pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, the way she did everything deliberately, completely. I called the bank. The transfer was initiated using your online banking credentials. Someone logged in from a device in Boston, where Vivian lived. I felt something cold move through my chest. But I pushed it down the way I'd been pushing things down my entire life, with work, with routine, with the comfortable fiction that if you don't name a thing, it isn't real. There's got to be an explanation. There is an explanation. Our daughter took $3,000 from our savings account without asking. The words hung in the boatyard air between the smell of oak shavings and marine varnish. I looked at my wife, this woman who had spent 40 years, loving me with a patience I didn't deserve, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. Fear. Helen Brynn was afraid of our daughter. I'm opening a separate account, she said. $8,000. Safety fund. My name only. She put her gloves back on. When the storm comes, we'll need it. I said nothing. She went back to the garden, and the moment passed, the way all the important moments pass quietly, without ceremony, leaving behind only the faint echo of a warning you didn't take seriously enough. The third time was the night before she went to the hospice. January 2019. She was thin by then, so thin that her wedding ring hung loose on her finger, and she'd taken to wearing it on a chain around her neck so she wouldn't lose it. I was sitting beside her bed at home, holding her hand, trying not to look at the morphine pump, because looking at it meant accepting what it was there for. Walter. Her voice was barely above a breath. The lesson planner. In the closet. Top shelf. Behind the Christmas linens. Helen, listen to me. She squeezed my hand with a strength that surprised us both. The planner has everything. Bank statements, account numbers, Della's contact information, instructions. She paused, gathering air the way I would later gather it in my hospital bed, carefully, rationally, as if each breath had a budget. And a letter. For Vivian. Don't read it until you need to. Need to when? She looked at me, and I saw in her eyes the same thing I'd seen in the boatyard, that fear, patient and certain but softened now by something else. Forgiveness. She was forgiving me in advance for all the ways I would fail to listen after she was gone. You'll know, she said. She died 11 days later. And I put the lesson planner on the top shelf behind the Christmas linens and didn't touch it, because touching it meant she was really gone. And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for 2 years. And by the time I might have been ready, I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, listening to my daughter sell my life by the pound. Helen tried to tell me 3 times. I hear her now. Jamie came on a Tuesday. I knew because Lorraine told me, and because Tuesdays were the quietest days on the ward, the day the cleaning crew waxed the hallway floors and the whole building smelled like lemon and ammonia, a combination that made my eyes water even though I couldn't wipe them. I heard him before I saw him. Not his footsteps. Jamie had always walked quietly. A habit he'd picked up as a boy, when the house on Norwood Road would go tense and silent during one of Vivian's moods, and moving without sound was the safest way to get from the kitchen to the stairs. What I heard was his breathing. Quick, shallow. The way a person breathes when they're standing outside a door they're not sure they want to open. Then the door opened, and my grandson walked in. He was 28. Thin in a way that worried me, not athletic. Thin but stretched thin. The kind of lean that comes from skipping meals and carrying too much on a frame that wasn't built for it. His hair was longer than I remembered, curling behind his ears, and he had a beard now, patchy and uneven. The kind a young man grows when he's too tired or too distracted to shave. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up and work boots that had actually been worked in. Scuffed, salt-stained, the leather cracking at the toe. He looked like me. Helen had always said that, and I'd always deflected it. But standing there in the doorway with the fluorescent light behind him, and his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for weather, he looked so much like the man I'd been at 28 that my chest ached in a way the monitors couldn't measure. "Hey, Grandpa." His voice cracked on the second word. He cleared his throat, pulled a chair to the bed, and sat down hard, like his legs had been waiting for permission to stop holding him up. "Sorry it took me so long. Mom didn't tell me. I found out from Hank. He called my work looking for you, and someone told him what happened, and he tracked me down at the job site in Salem." Hank. Of course it was Hank. 31 years at my side. And the man was still looking out for me from the other side of a phone line. Jamie sat there for a while, not speaking. He looked at the monitors, the IV, the feeding tube, the bed rails. He looked at my hands on top of the blanket still. Useless. Arranged neatly by Lorraine that morning, with the fingers slightly curled so the joints wouldn't stiffen. He looked at everything except my eyes. And I understood why. Because looking into the eyes of someone who is fully present but completely trapped is a thing most people can't do without breaking. When he finally looked, I was ready. I blinked once. Slow. Deliberate. "You can hear me," he said. Not a question. I blinked once. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and pressed his palms together like he was praying or trying to keep his hands from shaking. Hank said Mom's been handling everything. The house, the boatyard, your accounts. He said she's been talking to some developer about selling the yard. I blinked once. "Is that what you want?" 2 blinks. No. Something moved across Jamie's face. A flash of anger so quick that if I'd been anyone else, I would have missed it. But I knew that face. I'd watched it grow from a baby's round softness to a boy's sharp curiosity to a young man's guarded stillness. And I knew what anger looked like when Jamie wore it. Because Jamie wore anger the way I did. Quietly, internally. Like a crack in a hull below the waterline, where nobody can see it spreading. "Grandpa, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest." He swallowed. "Did Mom take your money?" 1 blink. "Before the stroke?" 1 blink. "After?" 1 blink. He closed his eyes. Sat back. The chair creaked. Outside the window, a gull screamed a long, ragged sound that cut through the glass and hung in the air between us. "I should have come sooner," he said. And his voice was thick now, the words swollen with something he was trying very hard to keep down. "I should have after Grandma died. I should have been here. But Mom said you wanted space. She said you were grieving and you needed time alone. She told me you didn't want visitors." He opened his eyes. "That wasn't true, was it?" 2 blinks. "No." He nodded slowly, absorbing it the way a plank absorbs water, not all at once, but deeply, permanently, in a way that changes the shape of the thing. The door opened again. Vivian. She stopped when she saw Jamie. For 1 second, just one something crossed her face that wasn't calculation or control. It was surprise, raw and unguarded, the kind that comes when a variable you didn't account for walks into your equation. Then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, measured expression I'd watched her perfect over 30 years. "Jamie, I didn't know you were coming. That's because you didn't tell me Dad was in the hospital. I was going to. He's been here almost 2 weeks, Mom." The silence between them was a living thing. It filled the room the way the tide fills a dry dock slowly, inevitably, with a pressure that builds against every surface. I watched my daughter and my grandson face each other across my hospital bed, and I saw 2 versions of the same blood, one turned cold, the other still fighting to stay warm. Vivian set her purse on the windowsill. The same windowsill where Lorraine had placed Marcus's power of attorney folder. "This isn't the time or place, Jamie. You're right. The time was 2 weeks ago. The place was a phone call. Your grandfather is very sick." Decisions needed to be made quickly. I didn't want to worry you. Until. I. Until what? Until you'd sold the boatyard? Until you'd emptied his accounts? Jamie stood. The chair scraped backward. Hank told me about Crestline. He told me about the developer meetings. He told me Marcus has been walking through the yard with a tape measure. Vivian's eyes moved to me just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see something in them I hadn't expected. Not guilt. Not shame. Calculation. She was calculating how much I'd communicated. How much Jamie knew. How much damage had already been done to her plan. We'll talk about this at home, she said. Not here. I don't have a home here anymore, Mom. You made sure of that. Jamie turned back to me. He put his hand on mine, the first real human contact I'd felt since Lorraine's fingers on my pulse that first night. His palm was warm and calloused. A working hand. A hand that knew what wood felt like and what salt air did to skin. I'm not going anywhere, Grandpa, he said. I'll be back tomorrow. He walked out without looking at his mother. And Vivian stood by the window for a long time, staring at the harbor, her reflection in the glass perfectly still, perfectly composed, perfectly terrifying. I lay in my bed and thought about the two people who had just stood in this room. My grandson, who had come back. My daughter, who had never really left. She'd just changed into something I didn't recognize. And somewhere on a shelf in my house, behind the Christmas linens, Helen's lesson planner waited in the dark. It happened at 12:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock above the door, the only thing I could do in the dark hours when sleep wouldn't come and the monitors beeped in rhythms that almost sounded like breathing, but weren't. The ward was quiet. Night shift quiet. Which is different from daytime quiet. Daytime quiet has texture footsteps, phones, the distant murmur of the nurse's station. Night shift quiet is flat, empty, the kind of silence where any sound becomes an event. The first sound was the door handle. Not the quick, confident push that Lorraine used, or the tentative half-turn that Tanya favored. This was slow, careful, the handle depressed by millimeters, the way a person opens a door when they don't want anyone to hear it. Marcus stepped in. He was wearing dark clothes, a black jacket, dark jeans, sneakers instead of his usual polished shoes. No briefcase this time. Instead, he carried a phone in one hand and a folded document in the other. He didn't turn on the light. He moved by the glow of the monitors and the thin strip of hallway light that fell through the gap beneath the door. He went to the foot of my bed and stood there for a moment, looking at me. I kept my eyes half closed, not blinking, not moving, letting him think I was asleep. It was the only weapon I had. Stillness. The same stillness that had been my prison was now my camouflage. Marcus unfolded the document and held it near the monitor light to read it. I couldn't see the text, but I could see the letterhead, a logo I didn't recognize. Something with a blue cross, and the words, Coastal and Care in a serif font. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, it's me. I'm in the room now. A pause. No, he's out. They gave him the sedative at 10. Another pause. Longer. The transport van is it confirmed for 1:30? Good. I need the paperwork to show a voluntary facility transfer. Daughter's signature is on the authorization form. I had her sign it this afternoon. A pause. Coastal Care Rehabilitation in Haverhill. Private facility. They don't ask questions if the billing is prepaid. Haverhill. 40 miles inland. Away from Rockport. Away from Addison Gilbert. Away from Lorraine and Della. And everything that stood between my daughter's plan and its completion. They were going to move me in the middle of the night to a facility where nobody knew me, nobody was watching, and nobody would think to look. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket. He moved to the side of the bed and began doing something I couldn't see. I heard a click, then a mechanical release, and I realized he was lowering the bed rail. The metal guard that separated me from the edge of the mattress folded down with a soft clank, and the air on my right side suddenly felt open and exposed. My heart rate climbed. I couldn't control it. The monitor registered the change, a series of beeps that shifted from their steady rhythm to something faster, more insistent. Marcus glanced at the screen, then at my face. "Easy, Walt," he murmured. "Just going for a little ride." He reached beneath the bed for the wheel locks. I heard the first one release a metallic snap, then the second. The bed shifted slightly, and I felt the whole frame begin to float, untethered from the floor, ready to roll. The third lock released. He moved to the fourth, and the lights came on. Not gradually, not gently. The full overhead fluorescence blazed to life with a hard, buzzing white that flooded the room like a searchlight. Marcus straightened so fast he cracked his elbow against the bed rail, and standing in the doorway, one hand on the light switch and the other holding her phone screen illuminated, camera app open, red recording dot pulsing, was Lorraine. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She stood there recording, her face absolutely still. And Marcus froze with his hand on the fourth wheel lock, like a man caught reaching into someone else's register. 3 seconds passed. 5. The fluorescence hummed. The monitor beeped. Marcus's breathing was audible now, quick, ragged. The breathing of a man whose plan had just collapsed in real time. "Step away from the bed, Mr. Harlow." Lorraine's voice was calm. The voice of the burn unit. The voice of a woman who had watched worse things than this and held steady. "I was just checking on him. The bed rail was loose. Step away from the bed." He stepped back. 1 pace. 2. His eyes went to the phone in her hand and stayed there. "This room has a security camera," Lorraine said. It didn't. I knew that, and I suspected she knew that, but Marcus didn't. His face changed. The calculation that Vivian wore so well looked clumsy on him, like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. "I've also been recording since I entered. And I called hospital security 60 seconds ago. They're on their way up." "You don't understand," Vivian authorized. "A daughter cannot authorize a patient transfer at 1 a.m. without the attending physician's approval, a signed discharge order, and a receiving facility confirmation on file with this hospital's administration." Lorraine took 1 step into the room. Just one. But it changed the geometry of everything. None of those documents exist. What you're attempting is an unauthorized removal of a vulnerable patient. In Massachusetts, that's a felony. The word landed like an anchor. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he looked at me, looked right into my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something behind his practiced calm that I recognized. It was the same thing I'd seen in Helen's eyes in the boatyard. Fear. But his fear wasn't for me. His fear was for himself. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, quick security. Marcus grabbed the document from the foot of the bed, folded it, and moved toward the door. Lorraine didn't step aside. He had to turn sideways to get past her. And as he did, she spoke one more time, quiet enough that only he and I and the recording could hear. "I have every shift documented, Mr. Harlow. Every visit, every time you came alone, every phone call in the stairwell." She paused. "Tell Vivian." He left. His sneakers made no sound on the waxed floor, but I could hear him breathing all the way to the elevator. Lorraine walked to my bed. She re-engaged the wheel locks 1, 2, 3, 4, each snap, precise and final. She raised the bed rail. She checked my vitals, adjusted the blanket, and looked down at me with an expression that held no triumph, no satisfaction, only the grim, tired focus of a woman who understood that this was not the end of anything. This was just the first wave breaking. "You're safe tonight, Mr. Brynn," she said. She pulled the chair to my bedside and sat down. "I'm staying until morning." Outside, the harbor was invisible, but I could hear it. The tide turning against the granite. the slow, relentless push of water that had been moving long before any of us were born and would keep moving long after we were gone. And for the first time since I'd woken up in this bed, I felt something besides fear. I felt defended. They brought me home on a Wednesday. 3 weeks and 4 days after the wharf and the coffee mug and the white flash behind my eyes. Della had arranged it a medical transport van, a home care setup with a hospital bed in the parlor, and a rotating schedule of visiting nurses coordinated through Lorraine. The court's temporary guardian ad litem had approved the transfer on the condition that Vivian and Marcus were prohibited from unsupervised access to both me and the property until the capacity evaluation was complete. Jamie rode with me in the van. He sat on the bench beside my gurney, one hand resting on the rail, not holding it but touching it the way you touch something when you need to confirm it's real. He didn't say much during the ride. He watched the road through the small rear window, and every time we turned a corner, he'd glance at me and then look away, as if checking that I was still there. The van turned onto Norwood Road at 10:15 in the morning. I knew because the church bell at the Congregational was ringing 2 strikes for the quarter hour, the same bell that had rung every 15 minutes for as long as I could remember, the metronome of a town that measured time in tides and seasons and the slow erosion of granite. When they carried me through the front door, I smelled the house before I saw it. Every home has a scent, a signature that lives in the walls and the curtains and the spaces between the floorboards where decades of living have soaked in. The house on Norwood Road smelled like pine cleaner and old wood, and the faintest trace of Helen's lavender soap, which had no right to still be there after 2 years, but was, stubbornly, impossibly, as if the house itself refused to let her go. They set me up in the parlor, the front room with the bay window that looked out toward the harbor. Helen had always called it the good room, the room where company sat and tea was served in cups with saucers. Now it held a hospital bed, an IV stand, a vitals monitor, and a man who couldn't move. The bay window was open an inch, and the salt air came through in slow pulses, mixing with the lavender and the pine, and I closed my eyes and let myself believe, for just a moment, that I was home and that home still meant what it used to mean. Then Jamie's voice came from the hallway. Quiet. Tight. The voice of a man looking at something wrong. Grandpa. Someone's been in the house. Lorraine had come with us off duty. Unofficial. Carrying a bag of medical supplies and a thermos of the coffee she seemed to produce from nowhere. She was the first to follow Jamie's voice. I heard her footsteps move from the parlor through the dining room and stop. The desk, Jamie said. All the drawers are open. Papers everywhere. I couldn't see it from my bed, but I could hear them moving through the house. Jamie's boots on hardwood, Lorraine's quieter steps behind him, and I could hear what they found. The kitchen cabinets, opened and rifled. The hall closet, its contents pulled forward. The bedroom upstairs, Helen's and mine, where the dresser drawers had been emptied onto the bed and the closet door stood open. Jamie came back to the parlor. His face had the same tightness I'd seen at the hospital, but deeper now, compressed, the way pressure builds inside a sealed vessel. Your filing cabinet in the study, the lock's been forced. Tax returns, insurance documents, the boatyard title, it's all pulled out and scattered. Some of it might be missing. I can't tell yet. He knelt beside my bed. The bedroom closet. Was there anything important on the top shelf? The top shelf. Behind the Christmas linens. Helen's lesson planner. My heart rate spiked. The monitor beside me chirped its alarm, a sound I'd come to associate with moments when my body screamed what my mouth couldn't. Jamie looked at the screen, then back at me. There was something up there. Something important. One blink. Yes. Is it gone? I didn't know. I couldn't see. I couldn't walk up the stairs and check. I was lying in the good room with salt air on my face, and my wife's lavender in my lungs, and the knowledge that someone had walked through our home and opened every drawer and touched every surface and taken whatever they wanted while I lay in a hospital bed 30 miles away. Lorraine went upstairs. I heard her footsteps cross the bedroom floor, heard the closet door creak, that same creak Helen had asked me to fix 100 times and I never did. because the creak was part of the house, part of its voice, and fixing it felt like silencing something alive. She came back down holding a stack of folded tablecloths, the Christmas linens, white with red poinsettias, the ones Helen had bought at a church sale in Gloucester years ago. Lorraine set them on the dining table. "The shelf is empty," she said. "Just these." The planner was gone. Jamie stood very still. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and between us passed something that didn't need blinks or words. A shared understanding that what had been taken from that shelf was not just a leather-bound lesson planner with bank statements and a letter. It was Helen's voice. Her last instructions. The map she'd drawn through the storm she knew was coming. "There's something else," Lorraine said. She held out her hand. In her palm was a small velvet box, navy blue. The kind jewelry comes in. The kind that holds things with weight beyond their size. The box was open. Empty. "This was on the bedroom floor," she said. "Under the dresser. Like it was dropped in a hurry. I knew that box. I'd bought it 46 years ago at a shop on Bearskin Neck with money I'd saved for 3 months by skipping lunch. Inside it had been a pearl necklace, a single strand. Not expensive by any standard except the one that mattered, which was that Helen wore it every Sunday for 43 years without ever once saying it was too simple or too small. The pearls were gone. Something broke in me then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It broke the way a rope breaks on a mooring line when the tide has been pulling at it for too long, one fiber at a time, silently, until there's nothing left to hold. My daughter had come into my house. She had opened my drawers and my cabinets and my closet. She had taken my wife's lesson planner, the one thing Helen had left to protect me. And she had taken the pearls. Not because they were valuable, because they were Helen's. Because taking them was a way of saying, "She's gone. I'm what's left. And what's left belongs to me." Jamie pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Della." Lorraine placed the empty velvet box on the windowsill, next to the bay window where the salt air still came through in slow, steady breaths. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with her hand on my shoulder, firm, present, a weight that meant I'm here, and let the silence hold what words couldn't. Outside, the harbor went about its business. Boats rocked. Gulls circled. The tide did what the tide always does. And I lay in the house that Salt built. And I understood, finally and completely, what Helen had been trying to tell me. The storm wasn't coming. It was already inside. Lorraine found the envelope on a Thursday morning. 6 days after we discovered the house had been ransacked. She had been cleaning not because it was her job, but because Lorraine Mosley was the kind of person who couldn't sit in a disordered room without fixing it. She'd come early, before the visiting nurse's shift started, carrying her thermos and a bag of groceries for Jamie, who had been sleeping on the couch in the study and eating what appeared to be an exclusive diet of gas station sandwiches and black coffee. I was in the parlor, in my hospital bed by the bay window, watching the morning light move across the ceiling the way it always had, slow, golden, shaped by the old glass in the window panes that warped the sunlight into soft, uneven patterns that Helen used to call God's fingerprints. Lorraine was in the kitchen, reorganizing the cabinets that had been emptied during the break-in. Jamie had put everything back roughly, shoving cans and boxes onto shelves without regard for Helen's system. A system so precise that I'd once watched her rearrange an entire shelf because someone had put the kidney beans where the chickpeas belonged. Lorraine, without knowing Helen's system, was somehow recreating it, grouping by type, labels facing forward, tallest in the back. As if the logic of a well-ordered kitchen was universal among women who understood that care lives in the details. I heard her stop. A pause in the rhythm of cans being placed on shelves. Then her footsteps, crossing the kitchen to the parlor doorway. Mr. Brynn. She was holding a white envelope standard size, unsealed, slightly yellowed at the edges. This was taped to the inside of the flour canister. Behind the bag of flour, against the back wall, the flour canister. A stoneware crock with a wooden lid that Helen had bought at a craft fair in Ipswich. It had sat on the kitchen counter for 30 years. Nobody opened it except Helen, because nobody baked except Helen. And after she died, the flower sat untouched, a small, sealed chamber of her daily life that even Vivian hadn't thought to search. Lorraine brought the envelope to my bedside and held it where I could see it. On the front, in Helen's handwriting, that careful, teacher's script that generations of fourth graders had learned to read on blackboards, were 3 words. For Walter's safety. Lorraine looked at me. I blinked once. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper torn from a yellow legal pad, the kind Della used, and a small plastic card. A bank card. Lorraine read the paper aloud, her voice steady but soft, the way she delivered everything that mattered. Walter, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I hope I'm being paranoid. I hope this envelope sits in the flower canister until it turns to dust and you never need it. But if you do need it, here's what you should know. Lorraine paused. She looked at me. I blinked once. Keep going. The card is for a savings account at Cape Ann Savings Bank. Account number on the back of this paper. The account holds $8,000. It's in my name. Only Helen Brynn, sole holder. I set it up in April 2017 after I found the first unauthorized transfer from our joint savings. Helen's voice, coming through Lorraine's mouth, 2 years after she'd left, as if she'd planned for exactly this moment. As if she'd known that one day I'd be lying in the parlor, unable to move, while a woman I'd barely known read her words back to me from a piece of yellow paper hidden inside a flower canister. That was Helen. She didn't hope for the best. She prepared for the worst and hid the preparations where only patience would find them. Lorraine continued. I haven't told Walter about this account. He knows about the safety fund, but he doesn't know where the card is or how to access it. I'm keeping it separate because I'm afraid that if Vivian finds out, she'll find a way to take it. I've watched her take small things for years. Money, objects, trust. Each time she takes a little more. Each time Walter forgives a little faster. I love my daughter, but I don't trust her. And love without trust is just a door you leave unlocked for someone who keeps stealing from you. The words landed in the parlor like stones dropped from a height. I felt each one not in my chest, which couldn't tighten, not in my throat, which couldn't close, but somewhere deeper, in the part of me that was still entirely mine, the part that locked-in syndrome couldn't reach. Helen had known. Not suspected, not worried, not vaguely feared. Known. She'd known with the same certainty she brought to everything, the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who had spent 30 years reading children and understood that people reveal themselves in patterns, and patterns don't lie. Lorraine read the rest. If something happens to me, this money is for Walter's legal protection. Contact Della Okafor. Her number is in my lesson planner, which I keep in the bedroom closet. Top shelf, behind the Christmas linens. Della will know what to do. If the planner is gone, her office is on Main Street in Gloucester, above the insurance agency. Look for the blue door. The blue door. A backup plan for the backup plan. Helen had built redundancies the way I built boats, every joint backed by another joint, every plank fastened twice, because the sea doesn't forgive a single point of failure. One last thing. Lorraine's voice wavered for the first time. Just slightly. Like a candle flame in a draft. Walter, if you're hearing this, I need you to do something you've never been good at. I need you to fight, not with your hands, not with your voice. With the truth. The truth is in the numbers, the bank records, the transfers, the accounts Vivian thinks nobody knows about. The truth is in the pattern. Follow the pattern, and you'll find everything you need. I've made sure of it. With love that doesn't need a receipt, Helen. Lorraine set the paper down on my blanket. She held the bank card where I could see it. Cape Ann Savings, Helen's name embossed in silver on the front. Then she tucked both back into the envelope and placed it in her bag. I'll call Della, she said. This changes things. I blinked once. But what I wanted to say, what I would have said, if my mouth and my lungs and my voice were still my own, was something simpler, something I should have said 1,000 times when the woman who wrote that letter was still alive to hear it. Thank you. I'm sorry. You were right. Jamie appeared in the doorway, hair uncombed, holding a mug of coffee. He looked at Lorraine's face, then at mine, and he knew the way people know when they walk into a room where something important has just happened, that the air had changed. What is it? He asked. Lorraine held up the envelope. Your grandmother hid this in the flour canister. $8,000. In a separate account. And a letter. Jamie set his coffee down. He sat on the edge of the couch, and for a long time, nobody spoke. Because Helen was speaking for all of us, from a piece of yellow paper, from inside a stoneware crock, from the other side of everything. And her voice was the only one that mattered. Outside, the tide was coming in. I could hear it through the bay window. The water rising against the seawall at the bottom of the street, pushing higher, claiming ground. Helen's tide. Steady, patient, and exactly on time. Jamie started with the emails. He'd driven to Salem the day after we found Helen's letter, to the apartment he shared with 2 roommates above a pizza shop on Derby Street. He came back carrying his laptop, a portable printer, and a cardboard box he set on the dining table without explanation. He pulled a chair up, opened the laptop, and didn't move for 7 hours. I couldn't see the screen from my bed in the parlor, but I could hear him, the rapid click of keys, the sharp exhale through his nose, the long silences when he was reading something that made his jaw tighten. Every hour he'd pour coffee, stand at the kitchen window staring at nothing, then sit back down. Lorraine was there. She'd taken to coming after her shifts, arriving around 8 with her thermos, checking my vitals, then settling into the armchair with a paperback she never made progress in because she spent more time watching Jamie than reading. At 11:30, Jamie pushed back from the table. I need to show you something. He carried the laptop to my bedside and angled the screen. Lorraine stood behind him. What I saw was an email from an account I didn't recognize, subject line highlighted in yellow. Mom gave me access to her email in high school, Jamie said. She needed me to print something and gave me her password. Never changed it. Bria's birthday, capital B, exclamation point. He scrolled down. She also never deleted anything. The email was from Vivian to Marcus. Dated 3 months before my stroke. Subject line. Crest line, timeline, revised. Jamie read it aloud, his voice flat and controlled. Marcus talked to Dad yesterday. He's slowing down. Repeats himself. Forgets names. I told him it's normal for his age. But Dr. Solis should be made aware in case we need documentation later. If we can establish cognitive decline before anything formal happens, the POA will be easier. Start the Crestline deposit paperwork. We should be positioned to move by January. Position to move. The words were clean. Deliberate, a woman planning a campaign, not a daughter thinking about her father. She'd written this while I was still walking the docks, still drinking coffee at the wharf, still in possession of every faculty I'd ever had. She'd been planning this before the stroke. The stroke just accelerated the schedule. Jamie scrolled to the next email. Then the next. He'd found 47 messages, spanning 18 months of correspondence, that mapped the architecture of what they intended to do with my life. The early emails were exploratory. Marcus researching Rockport property values. Vivian asking a financial advisor, referred to only as the consultant, about tax implications of liquidating a family trust versus selling assets individually. The boatyard zoning classification. Whether the house could be subdivided. The middle emails were operational. Marcus incorporating Crestline Property Holdings as an LLC in Delaware, chosen because Delaware doesn't require public disclosure of company ownership. Vivian opening a joint account in Newburyport under the Crestline name. Wire transfer instructions. Deposit schedules. The later emails written after my stroke turned clinical. Dr. Solis is cooperative, Vivian wrote on October 19th, 5 days after I collapsed. He agrees that locked-in patients have zero quality of life and that family should make end-of-life decisions. I'm pushing for comfort care, only no aggressive rehab, no speech therapy, no cognitive testing. The less functional he appears on paper, the stronger our position. Jamie stopped reading. His hands were flat on either side of the laptop, pressing down as if holding something in place. She told the doctor to stop trying to help you get better, he said. One blink. Lorraine spoke for the first time. The sedation orders. The reduced therapy. They weren't just keeping him quiet. They were building a paper trail of decline. Jamie pulled up another window, a spreadsheet built from bank records Della had subpoenaed. Columns. Date. Amount. Origin account. Destination account. Going back 2 years, he said. The first entries were small. 2,000. 1,500. Transfers from the joint checking account at Rockport Savings, the same account Helen flagged in 2017. After Helen's death, the amounts grew. 5,000. 8,000. 12,000. Always moved to Crestline's Newburyport account. Always initiated using online banking credentials that matched my login same username, routed through a VPN that masked the location. They used your login so it would look like you authorized everything, Jamie said. The total at the bottom was circled in red. $153,000. I stared at the number. A lifetime of work. 40 years of hauling boats and bending wood. Helen's pension. Our savings. The money meant to carry me through whatever years I had left. Gone moved in increments small enough to avoid bank flags, over a period long enough to look routine. Into a company designed to be untraceable. Jamie printed the spreadsheet and the emails. He stacked them in the cardboard box, the one he'd brought without explanation. And I understood. It was an evidence box. My grandson, who built houses for a living and had never entered a courtroom, was building a case. There's more, he said. I haven't gotten to the Crestline deposit records yet. And there's a thread between Mom and a real estate firm in Gloucester about the house. He closed the laptop, looked at me. Grandpa, I need you to understand something. Steady voice. But I could hear the fracture line beneath it. I'm not doing this to hurt Mom. I'm doing this because Grandma told you to follow the pattern. This is the pattern. One blink. He carried the box to the study closet and placed it on the top shelf, the same shelf where Helen's planner had been. Behind where the Christmas linens used to sit. He stood there for a moment. And I knew he was thinking what I was thinking. Helen's planner was gone. But the shelf wasn't empty anymore. The tide had turned. And this time, it was running in our direction. The video was on Vivian's cloud account. Same password. Same carelessness. The kind of arrogance that comes from believing no one would ever think to look. Jamie found it on a Sunday night. 3 days after the emails. He'd been methodical, working through Vivian's digital life layer by layer, cataloging emails, cross-referencing bank transfers with Crestline's filings, printing everything into labeled folders inside the cardboard box. But the video was different. The video stopped him. I heard it first. A sound from the laptop muffled, tinny the way phone recordings always are. My own voice. Weaker than I remembered, but unmistakably mine. Vivian, please. Just tell me what this is about. Then her voice. Sharp. Impatient. It's about the house, Dad. The taxes are overdue. The roof needs replacing. Marcus looked at the foundation and said there's water damage. You can't maintain this place alone. I've maintained it for 2 years. Barely. Look at this kitchen. Mom would be embarrassed. A pause. My voice. Quieter. Don't talk about your mother. Someone has to. Because you won't. You sit here like a ghost, walking to the dock every morning, talking to nobody. It's not fine, Dad. You're 74 and living in a house that's falling apart, and you refuse to see anything that doesn't look like the past. Then a sound. A scrape, a shuffle. My voice. "Vivian, what are you?" A thud. Not loud. The dull, heavy sound of a body hitting a wall, followed by Vivian's voice. Lower. Controlled. "You tripped. Be careful. The floor's uneven." Jamie paused the video. He sat at the dining table with the screen frozen and his hands in his lap and didn't move for a long time. Then he brought the laptop to my bed. "I need you to watch this. I need you to tell me if what I think happened is what happened." He played it again. The screen showed the kitchen, my kitchen, filmed from a phone propped on the counter. The angle was wide enough to show the table, the stove, the doorway. I was standing by the sink. Vivian was across from me. I watched myself thinner than I should have been, wearing a flannel with the collar turned wrong, holding a dish towel with both hands the way a man holds something when he needs an anchor. I watched the conversation play out. And then the moment, Vivian grabbed the sleeve of my flannel and pulled short, sharp. I stumbled sideways. My hip caught the counter edge. I reached for the wall, missed, went down against it. Not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to leave a bruise I'd told the doctor was from slipping in the shower. "You tripped. Be careful." Jamie closed the laptop with both hands, pressing the lid slowly, as if sealing something inside. "That's not a trip. She pushed you. One blink. How many times?" I couldn't answer that with blinks. How do you quantify the small violences of a relationship spanning decades? The arm grabs that leave fingerprints. The shoves disguised as guidance. The words that hit harder than hands. Vivian had never punched me. She'd never left a mark that couldn't be explained. She'd simply, over years, in increments, established a physical vocabulary of control I'd been too proud, or too ashamed, to name. Jamie sat on the edge of my bed, elbows on knees, palms pressed against his eyes. His shoulders shook once before he caught himself. "I used to hear it," he said, muffled through his hands. "When I was a kid, through the walls. Not the words, just the tone. That voice she'd use. Then a sound, like furniture moving, then quiet." He took his hands away, eyes red but dry. I told myself it was normal. Every family argues. He looked at me, and in his face I saw the expression I'd worn for years, the anguish of a person who knew the truth all along, but chose the easier story, and now stands in the wreckage of that choice. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I wanted to say, "Don't be sorry. You were a child. Children survive by not seeing what they can't fix." I did the same thing. Helen tried 3 times, and I looked away, because looking meant admitting the girl I'd held in a yellow blanket had become someone I didn't understand. We all failed in the same direction. We all chose love over truth and hoped love would be enough, but I couldn't say any of that. So I blinked once. And I hoped he understood that one blink meant more than yes. It meant, "I forgive you. I forgive myself. Now let's stop forgiving the person who doesn't deserve it and start fighting for the ones who do." Jamie wiped his face with the back of his hand. He carried the laptop to the table and began copying the video to a flash drive. One for Della, one for the box. "Della's filing the capacity evaluation petition tomorrow," he said, his back to me. "Neuropsychiatrist scheduled for Wednesday. Once that's done, we move to the trust." He plugged in the printer. "I'm also asking about a restraining order." He turned around. His face was calm, not peaceful, but settled. The face of a man who has looked at something terrible and decided what to do about it. Grandma said, "Follow the pattern." I followed it. He held up the flash drive. "The money proves fraud. The emails prove intent. And this proves who she really is." He put the flash drive in the cardboard box, closed the lid, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Because that's what Brynn men do when the world breaks. We go quiet, we make something with our hands, and we keep moving. Outside, the wind had shifted. Northeast now. pushing harbor chop against the seawall in hard, rhythmic slaps. A nor'easter building, somewhere in the Atlantic. The kind Helen used to track on the kitchen radio, marking its progress with a pencil on the back of an envelope. The storm was still here. But we weren't hiding from it anymore. Vivian came to the house on a Monday. Uninvited. The restraining order hadn't been granted yet. Della had filed it. But the court needed 72 hours. And Vivian knew it. She'd always had an instinct for the gaps between intention and enforcement. Jamie was in the kitchen making grilled cheese. I was in the parlor facing the bay window, watching a lobster boat crawl through November drizzle. Lorraine was on shift. We were alone. The front door opened without a knock. Vivian's heels on hardwood sharp. Proprietary. The sound of a woman walking through a house she'd already decided was hers. She appeared in the parlor doorway. Black coat. Hair pulled back. Face composed into the expression she wore like armor. She looked at me the way a person looks at furniture. They're deciding whether to keep. "Hello, Dad." Jamie appeared behind her, spatula in hand. "You can't be here, Mom. The restraining order isn't active." I checked. "I don't care. You're not welcome." She kept her eyes on me. "I came to talk to your grandfather." "Not you. Anything you say to him, you say in front of me." She turned slowly. "You went through my emails. You accessed my cloud storage. You copied personal files." Her voice was level, but the current beneath it was cold. Assessment. She was measuring what he knew and what it would cost. "That's a federal crime, Jamie. So is elder abuse. So is fraud." Jamie set the spatula on the hall table. "You want to talk about crimes? I've got a cardboard box full of them." Silence filled the parlor. I lay unable to move, watching my daughter and grandson face each other across the space where Helen's rocking chair used to sit. Vivian's composure held. That was what made her dangerous. Not the sharpness of her attacks, but the smoothness of her recovery. I did what I had to do. For this family, someone had to make decisions. The finances, the property, the medical bills. Dad was drowning, and nobody was doing anything. "You weren't saving him, Mom. You were selling him." The words landed. Vivian's jaw tightened just a fraction, and her eyes went to the bay window. "You're 28. You build houses for other people and can't afford your own rent. You have no idea what it costs to manage a life." She turned back. "I carried this family after your grandmother died. I made the hard calls. And this is what I get my own son playing detective. Grandma carried this family. You carried yourself." Something cracked in Vivian's face. Not dramatically the way ice cracks on a pond in March. A single line, running edge to edge. "You're dead to me," she said. 3 words. Without heat. Delivered with full knowledge of the damage. Jamie didn't flinch. "Then I'll be a ghost with a good lawyer." Vivian walked to the front door and pulled it shut with a soft click that was worse than any slam. Jamie stood still. Then he walked to my bed and sat on the floor beside it. Not the chair, the floor back against the frame. Knees pulled up, the way he used to sit as a boy when the house went quiet, and he needed something solid against his spine. "I'm okay," he said. He wasn't. 20 minutes later, Della arrived carrying her tote bag and a manila folder thick enough to bend. She looked at Jamie on the floor, looked at me, and understood immediately. She didn't ask. She set the folder on the dining table. "I need to show you both something." I found Helen's letter. Jamie looked up. "The planner is gone." Vivian took it. She took the planner. But Helen made copies. Della pulled a photocopy from the folder, faded. Helen's handwriting unmistakable. Helen mailed me copies of every document 18 months before she died. Sealed envelope. Instructions not to open unless something happened to Walter. She paused. Something happened to Walter. She held up the letter. Handwritten. 2 pages. This is Helen's letter to Vivian. But it's also something else. Della's eyes held the same fire I'd seen 20 years ago when she'd fought for Terrell's family. Helen didn't just leave a letter. She left a trust. A community trust filed with Essex County, naming Brynn Boatyard as a protected community asset. Executed 8 months before she died. Witnessed by 2 attorneys. Registered with the county clerk. Jamie stood. A community trust? Helen transferred the boatyard into a trust for the purpose of establishing a trade school and maritime education center. Walter is named lifetime beneficiary and custodian. Upon incapacity or death, custodianship passes to a board of 3. Della Okafor, Hank Pressler, and 1 family member named by Walter. The room shifted. Everything Vivian had worked toward the sale. The developer, the Crestline deposit, crashed against a legal wall Helen had built in secret, 8 months before cancer took her, with the certainty of a woman who believed in preparation over prayer. Vivian can't sell the boatyard, Della said. She never could. It hasn't belonged to the family since Helen filed the trust. It belongs to Rockport. I blinked. Once. Twice. Then my eyes burned with something I couldn't wipe away, and Lorraine wasn't there to do it, so the tears ran down my temples into the pillow, and I didn't care. Helen. Still building walls against the storm from the other side of it. Jamie was crying too. Standing in the parlor with grilled cheese burning in the kitchen and his mother's disownment still fresh, and the ghost of his grandmother filling every corner. She knew, he said. She knew all along. Della placed the letter on my blanket. The last line. In Helen's careful hand, the boatyard isn't property. It's a promise. And promises don't get sold. Hank Pressler brought the blueprints on a Wednesday afternoon, tucked inside a cardboard tube that smelled like the boatyard sawdust, marine varnish, and the metallic tang of old tools stored in salt air. He stood in the parlor doorway before he came in. Hank was 71. Built like a dock piling short, square. Weathered to the color of driftwood. 31 years beside me, and I'd never seen him hesitate at a doorway. But he hesitated now, looking at the hospital bed and the monitors, and his face went still. Like a harbor at slack tide. He took off his cap, crossed the room, and pulled up a chair. You look terrible, Walt. I blinked once, and Hank, who'd known me long enough to read my silences, nodded. Della called me. Told me about the trust. Helen put my name on it. He turned the cardboard tube in his hands. She never told me. Not a word. That was Helen. Seeds planted in the dark, trusted to grow when light came. After Della called, I went to the yard. Hadn't been there since your stroke. Marcus changed the padlock, cheap one. The corner of Hank's mouth lifted. I've been breaking into that yard since your father's day. He uncapped the tube and unrolled the paper across my blanket, large format. Blue-white, crisp fold lines. Across the top, in block letters, Brynn Community Boatworks, proposed renovation and expansion. Below, prepared by Helen Brynn, in consultation with Harborlight Architecture, Gloucester, M.A. Helen had commissioned blueprints. Found them in the loft above the steam box, Hank said. Flat file drawer, labeled, dated. He pointed to the corner. March 2019. 5 months before she died. The main shed, my father's tin-roofed building from 1,952 preserved but expanded. New harborside windows for natural light. Marine railway rebuilt with modern hydraulics. A classroom wing on the east end with workbenches, tool storage, projection screen, a second-floor offices, a small library, and a room labeled Helen Brynn Memorial Archive. She'd named a room after herself. Helen, who never named anything after herself, not a scholarship, not a classroom, not the garden she'd tended 40 years. But here, in blueprints for a building she'd never see, she'd written herself into the structure. Hank turned to the second sheet. Site plan: the boatyard's footprint on T-Wharf, surrounding buildings marked, paths connecting to Bearskin Neck and the town dock. A pavilion labeled Community Pier Open Access. She thought of everything, Hank said. Classroom for 20 students. Tool budget. Insurance estimates. Even contacted Massachusetts Maritime Academy about a partnership. The third sheet, classroom floor plan. 16 workstations with dimensions. Tool wall organized by function. First aid station by the door. And in the corner, drawn with particular care, a single workbench by the window, with the best harbor view. Beside it, in Helen's handwriting, Instructor's Bench, W.B., Walter Brynn. She'd built me into the plan. Not as a patient, not as an old man in a hospital bed, but as a teacher. She'd seen not what I was becoming, but what I still had to give. Hank saw me staring at those initials. He put his hand on my shoulder, heavy, calloused, steady, and left it there. Jamie came from the kitchen. He looked at the blueprints, and his eyes widened. "Grandma did this?" "Your grandmother was the most dangerous kind of person," Hank said. "The kind who plans quietly and executes perfectly. She hired an architect, filed the trust, hid the blueprints where only someone who knew the yard would find them. And she did it all while dying." Jamie leaned over the drawings, tracing the classroom wing. He was a builder. He read blueprints, the way I read wood grain. "This is real. This isn't a sketch. This is permitted level work." "She got further than any of us knew," Hank said. "Della arrived at 4. She studied the blueprints, then the trust documents, fitting pieces together with the focus of a woman assembling something larger than a defense. The trust authorizes renovation using boatyard revenue and designated funds. Helen allocated the $8,000 as seed money. But the real funding, she pointed to a clause. Helen's life insurance, $120,000. Payable to the trust. Not to Walter, not to Vivian. To the trust. Helen had redirected her life insurance to fund a building she'd never walk through, for students she'd never meet, in a boatyard she'd saved from her own daughter. "Vivian doesn't know," Della said. "The policy was through the school district's retirement plan, separate from family finances. Helen changed the beneficiary 18 months before she died. The same 18 months, Helen had spent her last year and a half building an ark while the rest of us argued about the weather." Jamie rolled the blueprints carefully back into the tube, holding it the way you hold something irreplaceable, both hands, close to the chest. "The trial is in 3 weeks, Della said. "Essex County probate. I've submitted everything. Trust, financial records, emails, video, capacity evaluation." She looked at me, which confirmed full cognitive function. "You're legally competent, Walter. 3 weeks. 21 days until the courtroom where everything would be decided. Money, boatyard, trust, restraining order, and the question of what happens to a daughter who tried to steal her father's life." Hank stood and put his cap on. "Helen asked me to look after the yard if anything happened. I didn't understand then." He tapped the tube. "When this is over, we build." He walked out. His boots on the porch sounded like the boatyard's solid, rhythmic. The sound of work about to begin. Jamie set the tube on the top shelf beside the evidence box. The shelf that Vivian had emptied was filling up with proof, with plans, with Helen's voice from every hidden corner. I looked at the harbor through the bay window. Somewhere beneath the gray water, the pilings my father set 70 years ago still held. And somewhere in Helen's blueprints, the future held too. But first, the courtroom. First, the storm's last act. Jamie wheeled me to the pier on a Sunday. Della had arranged it a supervised outing, approved by the visiting nurse, with Jamie as escort and Lorraine on standby by phone. The restraining order was active now, which meant Vivian and Marcus couldn't come within 500 feet of me or the property. But the pier was public ground, and Vivian had always understood the difference between what the law prohibited and what it couldn't prevent. The wheelchair caught on every crack in the sidewalk as Jamie pushed me down Norwood Road, past the cemetery and the footbridge, through streets that smelled like wood smoke and low tide. We came out onto Bearskin Neck, where the shops were shuttered for the season, and the only sound was wind pushing through empty awning frames. It was the first time I'd been outside in 6 weeks. The air hit me like a wall, cold, sharp, saturated with salt and the mineral smell of exposed granite. My eyes watered. My skin burned where the wind touched it, and somewhere beneath the numbness that had become my body's permanent weather, I felt something I hadn't felt since the wharf and the coffee mug and the white flash. I felt alive. Jamie stopped at the end of T Wharf, the same spot where I'd stood every morning for 41 years. The boatyard was to our left, locked and dark. Marcus's cheap padlock, replaced by one Hank had installed. The harbor stretched ahead, gray-green and restless. The mooring field empty, except for a few year-round lobster boats riding the chop, with the patience of things built to endure. I used to come here with Grandma, Jamie said, hands on the push bars, eyes on the water. She'd bring sandwiches, and we'd sit on that bollard, and she'd name every boat in the harbor, who owned it, who built it, what it was made of. He paused. She told me, a boat is just a promise that floats, a promise between the builder and the water. Helen's words, coming through Jamie now the way they'd come through Lorraine when she read the letter from the flour canister. Helen was everywhere in the blueprints, in the trust, in the memories of everyone she'd touched. She'd scattered herself across our lives like seeds, and in the worst season any of us had known, everyone was blooming. We sat for 20 minutes without speaking. I watched the harbor and listened to the water and felt the cold press against my face. And for a little while the world was simple, just a man and the sea and the sound of ropes against masts. Then I heard her heels, measured and deliberate. Getting closer, Jamie's hands tightened on the push bars. She can't be here. The restraining order covers the residence and the hospital, Vivian said, stepping into view from behind the bait shack at the base of the wharf. This is a public pier. I checked with my attorney. She was alone. No Marcus. She wore a gray wool coat and a scarf I recognized. Dark blue, cashmere, one Helen had given her for Christmas years ago. The irony of Helen's scarf around the throat of the woman who'd stolen her pearls was the kind of cruelty life invents without a writer. Jamie stepped around the wheelchair, positioning himself between us. Say what you came to say, and leave. I came to talk to my father. Not through lawyers or courts, just talk. Something in her voice was different, softer, the hard surface still there but eroded underneath by a fatigue that sounded almost real. She stopped 10 feet away. Close enough to see my eyes, far enough to stay outside Jamie's reach. Dad, I know what you think of me. I know about the emails, the bank records, the video. I know how it looks. She paused. But you don't know everything. You don't know what Marcus did. You think we were partners, we weren't. He ran the money, set up Crestline, moved the funds. I signed what he told me to sign because I was afraid of him. Her voice cracked a hairline fracture in porcelain, the same way Mom was afraid of what I was becoming, the same way Jamie was afraid of what he heard through the walls. Don't use my words against me, Jamie said. I'm not using them. I'm agreeing with them. She looked at the harbor. I became something terrible. But Marcus made it easy, made everything feel logical and clean and necessary. By the time I saw how far we'd gone, it was too late to come back. She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. Black. Unmarked. This is everything on Marcus's personal computer. Financial records, Crestline accounts, developer communications. The Haverhill facility contract. She held it toward Jamie. I copied it last night. He doesn't know. Jamie didn't take it. Why? Because the trial is in 2 weeks. And my lawyer says, I'm going to prison. The word landed flat, like a stone hitting still water. If I'm going down, Marcus is coming with me. She set the flash drive on the bollard, the same one where she'd sat as a child eating Helen's sandwiches, and stepped back. That's my last card. I've got nothing else. She turned and walked back along the pier, Helen's scarf trailing in the wind, heels clicking against the weathered planks. She didn't look back. She disappeared around the bait shack, and the sound of her faded into the harbor noise, and she was gone. Jamie picked up the flash drive and held it between his thumb and forefinger, studying it the way you study something that might be a gift or might be a grenade. Do you believe her? I thought about Vivian asking Helen for $5,000. Her voice on the video, sharp and commanding. Her face in the hospital doorway, calculating damages. The words, "You're dead to me," delivered like surgery. And then Vivian on the pier just now, wearing her dead mother's scarf, holding out a flash drive like a white flag, her voice cracking in a place she couldn't have faked. 2 blinks, then 1, then 2 again. I didn't know. Essex County Probate Court sat on Federal Street in Salem, a brick building with tall windows that let in the kind of cold, institutional light that makes everything look like evidence. Jamie wheeled me through the side entrance at 8:45 on a Monday morning in December. Della walked ahead, carrying 2 bankers' boxes stacked on a rolling cart, every email, every bank record, every photograph, every document we'd gathered over 7 weeks. Lorraine walked beside me, one hand on the wheelchair armrest, her presence steady and wordless. Hank followed behind, wearing the only suit he owned, navy blue, 10 years old, the shoulders tight across his back, like a man wearing something that belonged to a smaller version of himself. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag standing in the corner with a slight lean that nobody had corrected. Judge Patricia Calloway presided, a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a reputation, Della told me, for patience with facts and impatience with everything else. Vivian sat on the opposite side of the aisle with her attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who wore expensive shoes and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Marcus sat behind them in the gallery, alone, his face the color of old plaster. They didn't look at each other. Whatever partnership had existed between them had fractured on a pier 2 weeks ago, and the pieces were sitting in a flash drive that Della had already submitted to the court. Della opened with the timeline. She stood before Judge Calloway and laid out 18 months of evidence in a sequence so precise it felt less like a legal argument and more like a map, each point connected to the next by a line of cause and consequence that left no room for detour. The Crestline LLC, incorporated in Delaware to hide ownership. The 47 emails documenting a plan conceived months before my stroke. The bank transfers $153,000 moved in increments designed to avoid detection, using my stolen credentials routed through a VPN. The sedation orders at Addison Gilbert, requested by Vivian to suppress my recovery and build a paper trail of decline. The midnight transport attempt, Marcus unlocking my bed wheels at 12:47 a.m., recorded on Lorraine's phone. The break-in at the house on Norwood Road. Helen's lesson planner stolen. Her pearl necklace taken. The video of Vivian pushing me into a wall and calling it a trip. Each piece landed in the courtroom, like a plank being nailed into a hull one after another. Steady, structural, building something that couldn't be denied. Lorraine testified first. She described the chart discrepancies, the sedation orders, the bed turned to face the wall, the midnight encounter with Marcus. She spoke the way she did everything calmly, precisely, without embellishment. When Fitch cross-examined her, asking whether she had a personal relationship with the patient that might cloud her judgment, she looked at him with those burn unit eyes and said, "My relationship with Mr. Brynn is professional. My judgment is that someone was trying to make him disappear quietly. That's not clouded. That's clear." Jamie testified next. He described finding the emails, the bank records, the video. He described the flash drive Vivian had given him on the pier, its contents, confirming everything Della had alleged and adding new details. Marcus's communications with the Haverhill facility, prepaid billing arrangements designed to keep me sedated and isolated indefinitely. When Fitch asked why Jamie had accessed his mother's email without permission, Jamie said, "My grandmother told my grandfather to follow the pattern." I followed it for him because he couldn't move his hands. The courtroom was quiet after that. The kind of quiet that has weight. Then Della called her final witness. Not me, I couldn't speak beyond single words, and even those cost more effort than the courtroom could imagine. Not Hank, though he was ready. She called Vivian. Fitch objected. Calloway overruled. Vivian took the stand. She looked different under the courtroom lights, smaller. The sharp edges softened by something that might have been exhaustion or might have been the particular fatigue of a woman who had run out of angles. Della approached her without hostility, without theatrics, with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. Mrs. Harlow, did you direct your husband to establish Crestline Property Holdings for the purpose of transferring your father's assets? Marcus handled the business side. I trusted his judgment. Did you instruct Dr. Solis to increase your father's sedation and reduce his physical therapy? A pause. I asked for comfort care. I believed he was suffering. Did you enter your father's home and remove documents and personal property, including a pearl necklace belonging to your late mother? The pause was longer this time. Vivian's hands were flat on the witness rail, pressing down the way Jamie's had pressed against the dining table the night he found the video. The same gesture, the same bloodline, the same instinct to hold something steady when everything inside is shaking. The necklace was my mother's, Vivian said. I wanted something of hers. Della let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then she placed Helen's letter on the evidence table, the original, recovered from the copies Helen had mailed 18 months before her death. She read the last line aloud. The boatyard isn't property. It's a promise. And promises don't get sold. Vivian closed her eyes. And when she opened them, something had broken, not the composure, which had cracked weeks ago on the pier, but something deeper. The architecture of justification she'd built around herself, the story she'd told herself about necessity and family duty and hard decisions, it collapsed in a courtroom in Salem under fluorescent lights, while her father watched from a wheelchair and her son sat in the gallery, and the father, ghost of her mother, spoke from a piece of yellow paper. Judge Calloway delivered the ruling at 4:17 p.m. Vivian Brynn Harlow. 2 years in county jail, 5 years probation. Full restitution of $153,000. Permanent restraining order. Marcus Harlow. 1 year in county jail, 3 years probation. Restitution. Crestline Property Holdings, dissolved. The community trust was validated and affirmed. Brynn Boatyard was confirmed as a protected community asset, and the court named Bria Harlow, 15 years old, salt water in her veins, as primary beneficiary of Walter Brynn's personal estate. Held in trust until her 18th birthday. 3 months after the trial, they opened the doors of Brynn Community Boatworks on the first Saturday in March. I was there. Not standing, I would never stand at the end of T Wharf again, but sitting in my wheelchair at the entrance of the main shed, facing the harbor, with a wool blanket across my legs and salt air on my face, and the sound of 37 people filing into a building my wife had dreamed into existence from the other side of goodbye. Hank had done the work. He'd brought in a crew of local tradesmen, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, men and women who'd grown up in Rockport and understood what the boatyard meant to a town that had been losing its working waterfront, one boutique at a time. They'd followed Helen's blueprints down to the inch. New windows along the harbor wall. The marine railway rebuilt. 16 workstations in the classroom wing, each one sanded smooth and sealed with the same marine varnish my father had used in 1952. And in the corner by the window with the best view of the harbor, a single workbench set apart from the others. Slightly larger, with 2 initials carved into the front rail in letters small enough that you had to lean close to read them. W.B. Jamie had carved them himself, on his knees, with a chisel he'd found in my old tool chest. He told me later he'd done it at midnight, alone in the shop, because he didn't want anyone to see him crying while he worked. The ceremony was simple. Hank said a few words about my father and the yard and what it meant to build something with your hands that the water couldn't take. Della read the trust charter aloud, Helen's language, Helen's vision, every clause shaped by a woman who understood that the best way to protect something is to give it away to the people who need it most. Lorraine stood beside my wheelchair and said nothing. Which was exactly right, because Lorraine had always understood that the most important things don't need narration. And then Bria spoke. She was 15. Tall for her age, with Jamie's dark hair and Helen's steady eyes, and a voice that carried across the shed without effort, the way sound carries across water on a still morning. She stood at the instructor's bench, my bench, and read from a single index card she held in both hands. My great-grandmother Helen believed that everyone deserves a place to begin, she said. Not a place to finish. Not a place to prove yourself. Just a place to start. A workbench. A set of tools. Someone patient enough to show you how to hold them. She looked up from the card. This boatyard is that place. And it's here because one woman decided that a promise was worth more than a price. She folded the card and put it in her pocket, and 37 people applauded in a tin-roofed shed on T-Wharf, while the harbor shimmered behind them, and the ghost of my wife stood everywhere and nowhere at once. After the ceremony, Jamie wheeled me to the end of the pier. Just the two of us. The way it used to be, just me and the harbor. Every morning, before the sun came up, he parked the wheelchair at the edge and sat on the bollard beside me. The same bollard where Helen used to sit with sandwiches, the same one where Vivian had left her last card. The harbor was calm, late winter calm, the kind that feels like the water is holding its breath before spring exhales. Grandpa, Jamie said, I got a call from the county yesterday. Mom requested a visit. I looked at him. She wants to see you. She said she has something to say. He picked at a splinter on the bollard. You don't have to. Della said, it's your choice. I thought about Vivian. Not the Vivian who calculated the boatyard's value from a hospital window. Not the Vivian who said, you're dead to me, to her own son. But the other Vivian, the baby born in a nor'easter, the girl on the workbench with peanut butter crackers, the daughter I'd promised to protect from everything except the thing she became. I didn't blink yes. I didn't blink no. Some answers need more time than eyelids can give. Jamie nodded. He understood. He'd learned, over these months, to read the silences between my blinks the way Helen used to read the fog, not as absence, but as presence waiting to reveal itself. We sat there until the light changed. The sun dropped behind the buildings on Bearskin Neck and painted the harbor in shades of copper and iron, and the mooring lines caught the last of it and glowed like filaments in a bulb about to burn out or about to come alive. I couldn't tell which, and maybe that was the point. I thought about Helen. Not the Helen who was sick. Not the Helen who hid envelopes in flour canisters and filed trusts and mailed copies of everything to a lawyer with a blue door. I thought about the Helen who stood in the kitchen doorway with flour on her wrist and told me to go walk the docks and come back when I had something to tell her. I had something to tell her now. I would tell her that the boatyard was open, that the workbenches were full, that Bria had her eyes and her voice and her stubborn belief that people deserve a place to begin, that Hank still took his cap off indoors and Jamie still made terrible grilled cheese and Lorraine still read the chart before she read the patient, that the house on Norwood Road still smelled like lavender and the bay window still let in God's fingerprints and the garden still wouldn't grow right because the soil was too sandy, but someone, maybe Bria, someday would figure it out. I would tell her that the storm came, just like she said it would, and that it broke some things that couldn't be fixed and revealed some things that couldn't be hidden, and that the people she'd planted like seeds, Della, Lorraine, Hank, Jamie, Bria, had bloomed in the wreckage exactly when they were needed. And I would tell her that I heard her. Finally. Completely. The way the harbor hears the tide, not as a sound, but as a force that shapes everything it touches. Jamie stood up from the bollard. Ready to go home? I blinked once. He wheeled me back along the pier, past the boatyard where the lights were still on and someone was already at a workbench learning to hold a tool for the first time, past the bait shack and the chandlery and the streets that smelled like salt and wood smoke and beginning. The harbor breathed behind us. The tide was coming in, and for the first time in a long time, I had something to tell it. If someone you love is elderly, isolated, or vulnerable, don't wait for the storm. Build the walls now. Establish a trust. Assign power of attorney to someone you trust, not someone who asks for it. Write the letter. Hide the envelope. Make the copies. And if you see the signs: unexplained transfers, increased isolation, medical decisions that don't make sense, say something. Say it loudly. Say it to a lawyer, a nurse, a judge, a neighbor, anyone who will listen. Because the people who prey on elders count on one thing above all else: silence. Don't give it to them.